Hello and welcome to Dominion 6 Rise of the Podcaster, the premier, one and only, so far, Dominion 6 podcast. I am one of your hosts, HP Muchcraft, and today my co hosts will be introducing themselves so you can know whose voice is whose.
Yeah, so I'm Sauron. This is me. And yeah, long-term podcaster, but in case you guys don't know, this is me.
I'm Darkle. Unlike Benito Mussolini, I am in fact young, youthful, and vigorous. And that's about
Okay.
Only there's a lot of things you can say there.
it.
All right. Just a disclaimer. I'm going to try to put this whenever we do recordings. Just to put it out there, anything we say in these podcasts, so people don't, we're not the end all be all of whatever we're talking about. We're just
I am.
talking about topics in the community, and sometimes we get playful with each other. This is not to throw shade. It's just this is our conversation with how we talk to each other. So hopefully people don't get confused when we're being toxic or whatever.
You should take everything I say super seriously.
Yeah,
100%
I'm never
literally.
wrong unless I am wrong.
Right. In which case, you're wrong for believing him. No,
Yeah,
so anyway, today we might have what might be a contentious topic, but one that is going through our minds as more and more people asking, is the
Kamala
podcast
Harris.
is the podcast Jover like Joe
Oh, that
Biden's
one.
campaign because the podcast is having fewer episodes. So what we're going to cover today is Dominion 6. Is Dominions finally Jover? Is this the one that finally kills Dominion?
Listen here, buddy.
I thought I thought this one was about like
We're. I think
politics.
he. I think we're. Listen, we're gonna touch on this briefly. I don't want to spend too long. I think really what needs to happen is maybe some of the early game stuff. Was kind of I think Winter fumbled a little bit with some of the indie changes, and it for sure some nations are hard to expand with. I just think the community in general either needs to play with different game modes, so you could have some sort of mod or something. It'd be something the community figures out, where you start with either more provinces, a better starting army, or something, and then there's more work for the hosts because then they have to like make sure like people's cap circles are balanced if there's more provinces, or if there's a mod that's more of like someone figuring out a mod. That way, certain nations are a little more balanced. I think it would just be easier to change the indie strength personally, but yeah, for sure, Winter making some of the provinces very obtuse or more RNG with like, oh, you can RNG 30 heavy cab in your cap circle, and then this really stifles like a scales nation. And you might say, oh, just take an awake god, but I think this is taking away options for players is not the direction you want to go in, and maybe that's why it's pushed certain players out of the community. Just to give a shout out to Rob, say like he's played less in Dominion 6, and he's the nation he loves, Droman, is just harder to play, and there's less builds, and it's less cool. So
I wasn't gonna do the whole Rob C is dead bit yet, but all
I mean, he could very easily come back. He
right.
I'm
Bro's
not
just
gonna.
been playing Civ.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could. Well, I
Kind of
mean, you're
dead.
not quote unquote dead if you decide to
Wait,
play another game.
what was that, Dark Wolf?
I just said it was kind of gay.
Wait, since when has the game Civilization been associated with gayness? Where did that come from?
Oh,
Well,
I missed it.
about 2 minutes ago, right? I was thinking about Robsier, and then I made it up because I thought it'd be funny.
Christ. All right,
You
so
know, I only value that you're honest, Dark Wolf.
if if you haven't been able to tell, this is going to be a grab bag episode. The topic is not actually is Dominion 6 Jover. We'll have to save that topic for later when it finally is Jover. But what we're going to be doing, a grab bag of things, and we're kind of going to be starting in the early game again, but we're going to be starting with like early game build order because it's the topic of the discussion that's come up a lot. And what I mean by build order is like, well, now in addition to your sacreds, unless you're a heavy cav nation, you like have a bunch more gold and resources and rec points in the beginning of the game. You can recruit units, and what commanders you can recruit is also a up in the air. Since Dominions 3, it has been generally the practice of Dominions players and the Dominions community to have the conventional wisdom of always build a mage out of every fort that can build a mage every turn if you're able to. And that logic has ruled for multiple editions, but now, given that mages are a lot higher in cost and you may need other things in the early game, it might be time to start mixing more mundane commanders into your early build order if you weren't doing that already. So,
I'm gonna stop you there. The I think this option of changing the standard always build a mage existed in Dominions 5, and it could have even existed in Dom 4. I think it's just like the fact that there's
buddy,
not enough
it
players who.
goes back to 3. Trust me.
Yeah, well, yeah. It started there and then it just became the norm. But
Yeah.
questioning the build order is like an interesting point. So, depending on who you talk to, you might hear different things. So, you know, if that mage is an assassin or if it's a commander, like famously, Lucid Tactics always talks about Eagle Kings and how you can use them to expand. This is not unique to Calum, and other nations in the game can have this option, especially depending on your build. And if your build enables via your bless or whatever you to solo expand with commanders, and this is when you would alter that mage build order. This is just one of the many ways. Um, and then, like in your build order as well, instead of a mage, you should maybe be thinking about when you make scouts in there or whatever. It really it depends what you want to do, but I definitely think like the fact that no one ever questions it, and it's like, oh yeah, expansion phase is just you make your mage and you try to hit 20 provinces or and just barely 15. Like there's more to it than that, and the fact that it's not really discussed, I think, says a lot about the community in general. It's like you can dynamically adapt your build order based on what provinces you get and what is going on. And there's different strategies you can employ that are still viable, and it just really depends what your goal is. And you need to like kind of commit to an idea or thing depending on what your nation is or what your overall strategy is. And there's a lot of discussion there, and it's a shame it's not really talked about at all. And yeah, I just wanted. That's
So
why we're
Are
let's
playing.
you insinuating the game with the average player age of 45 struggles to learn new tricks?
I
damn.
don't think the average player base age is 45, but whatever.
That's
Aren't you
right.
like, isn't
It's
HP like 40?
60. The average player base of Dominions
Oh
is
yeah, you have to be a
60.
fucking skeleton. Yeah, good one.
Yeah, you got it. You gotta use skeletons or be one. Nah, but let's instead of talking
Use
about
skeletons or be one?
no one's talking about it, let's actually talk about it. Well, you know, you have builds. I think I made like turbo expanders last game. The Hatch used to use them back before he's fucking Dominions was a Jover for him, but Balls used them. But one thing you can do is use sacred commanders that are also priests in your expansion phase with small squads of sacred bodyguards if you have command lines that are fucking yoked up enough. And that can be, if you take a turbo expander build, that can be a tremendous boost to expansion, like just gigantic. But I think more practically, a lot of times when you'll look at your nation and you'll have a mage, maybe it's like around the 250 to 300 goldish range now, which is a lot of your gold early on. If you have those kind of mages, and then you look, you might have a maybe 100 gold commander that you get that gives you access to line formations. And line formations are a big advantage, but especially in the expansion phase, they are a big advantage because you were so limited on your early troops, especially as scales nations compared to the Indies, that you just need that frontage so that you don't get some dipshit running past your front lines and then stabbing your commander or whatever.
That's always there is nothing worse than getting rear sniped by the Indies.
Right.
Well,
Like,
I'm happy that HP recently. So at the time of this recording, he just put out his Archer video. So I'm happy you highlighted that. Um, for expansion, the reason why sometimes your commanders get sniped or shot at, and a lot of YouTubers glance over this like, oh my gosh, I think the Indies have special targeting. They're hitting my commanders or shooting at my commanders or my priest or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not how targeting works. You have the squad. How
Well,
squads work is
we don't know how targeting works, but yeah,
I'm
they
not.
can
I
randomly.
think we do at this point. Like, there's
No,
no formula, but it's basically if you
we know that
understand.
they lock on by squads, and so the more squads you have, the less chance you'll have of your commander getting locked on. But we don't know how the actual targeting
Well,
works.
all commanders are considered squads, so it doesn't. If you only have a priest in a group of sacreds, you basically have a 50% chance. However, that's weighed in the formula. We don't know, but it's more or less it's 50% because you can see the targeting. Like, you don't
Right.
need to know the
There
math.
there is well, you do. It's not a 50%. There is some
It's more or
chance.
less.
There is some chance that the that the enemy units will just walk on to your lone priest rather than your sacreds. And I don't know. It depends on closeness. Maybe. It's been theorized it depends on HP density, but we don't actually know. No one's actually
Or
proven it. Anyone who's tested it
yeah.
has not been able to figure out why the fuck these motherfuckers shoot
well,
at who they shoot at. But
I think that there's nuance. Like, it has something to do with protection as well. I think
well,
Johnny.
people think that. See,
Well,
no,
no,
when Johnny and I tested it, we did not get a definitive result on whether or not prot. We had people shooting at the lower prot shit and the higher prot shit. So it was like
well, it all comes down to regardless. The point is, like, it's not quote unquote like they have special targeting
right.
because this just happens in PD battles too. Like,
Yeah,
sometimes your fucking archers will shoot at
you're
the
the
guy.
indie archers do have some chance of just deciding to target your commander and shooting him down. And so, you know, rolling it back into the other conversation, sometimes having a commander and a priest, as much as that sucks, or bringing a scout or even to your battles or something, like can be the deciding factor of whether or
Mm.
not the indies are targeting you. Now, some
Yeah,
nations it doesn't matter because some nations you have a sacred cav and they have their sacred cav leader, and the sacred cav leader is also sacred cav are very durable, in which case you have to give a shit. Or maybe you're air one and you can very easily get up. What is it, alt one for air shield or whatever? I think that's alteration, but and then you don't have to care about him getting shot, or
I,
it's very low chance.
Yeah.
But
this all comes into what we're talking about before, which is the early game expansion phase, like choosing, how you construct your parties.
right,
And I think there's a lot of nuance to it, like what you're going to use, and there's ways you can mitigate or increase the efficiency of your expansion depending on your
uh,
choice, like either having a foreign temple to help get more priests, or just slotting in commanders to your future parties to kind of mitigate that risk of, if you have parties of 6 cavalry and you have a priest, maybe it's a good idea to, as that party is walking to that next province, if it's your third party, have a commander with some chitters come along. Because really, if the sacreds aren't going to fucking die, but the priest can die, but that your sacreds all of a sudden won't run because you haven't lost your leadership on the field. That's the difference
right.
between gaining a province and losing a province. And you lose the tempo if you fail the expansion.
And, while we're on build order, since a lot of times you're going to be candle capped with sacreds, maybe sometimes the correct build order is turn one. You just make 2 or 3 priests because you can't make your full complement of sacreds anyway. Obviously, with
Right?
Helheim you can, but with, say, a
Yeah.
Sacred Cav Nation, just make multiple priests so you have extra priests. You can send one out to make a temple, you can have them preach or
It's
whatever,
actually
or you
it's
could
actually
be.
interesting
Yeah,
because one nation, sorry to interrupt you, one nation that people naturally actually use their commander points very effectively is Scalaria.
right.
Oh,
And like
because they're
naturally,
making.
naturally people will make a lictor, make this, make assassins. I don't like, and I think it's because the Scalarian priest makes you treat commander points as a valuable tool.
They don't get citadels, do they?
No.
No, but I see what you're saying, Dark Wolf, because you're already in the mode of decision instead of just autopiloting. Well, some people will autopilot into Scalarian cultists, but
Yeah.
I see where you're going. Where you like instead of autopiloting, you're just like, all right, do I make cultists this turn or do I make mages this turn? And then once you're already in that decision mode, you can start wondering, well, actually, this turn I'd
Yeah,
like to
maybe
make a
I'm like
fucking
this.
assassin, or hey, I would actually like to have line formation or something. Um,
Yeah, Scalera is an interesting nation because you get the gladiators, you get assassins, you get the free spawn skeletons, and they have decent sacred. So they're actually one of the better expansion nations right out of the toolbox, and that's partially why I think they're such a strong nation. And then coupled with the fact that you have this infinitely scaling mechanic, um,
yeah.
it's just
Though
powerful. And
though no, though note we have not. I have not played with the Scalaria in 6, so I don't know. I know it was very strong last edition, but I don't know its relative strength now that the troop and gold and
I
mage
have a
numbers have been
game.
tweaked.
I
Yeah, I
think
have a
it's gonna
game that
be
I'm
like the
launching
same
with it, but
probably.
we'll see.
Okay,
I don't think having more gold is gonna outweigh like
yeah, for
you're
the
never
shit.
gonna have you're never gonna once Sclair starts attacking with 300 skeletons in every province, it doesn't matter if you get 20% more gold. Like it doesn't matter. You know, you've already scaled to the point where it's
But
like
sorry, it
Yeah.
matters before that point, which is significant because once Scalaria is attacking you with 300 skeletons in every province, you might actually have a few fucking spells, so that that's no longer an instant lose or anything like that. Um,
it goes back to the discussion like having purpose with your mages. If you're gonna do like this standard research thing, I think a lot of people do this not thinking, but like building a mage can have a purpose. If you're trying to hit like a timing for a particular
right.
spell, and there's value in rushing certain like level fives because spells allow you to threaten forts and
Buddy, there's value in rushing
threatening.
level 3s, okay? Like, they put Body Ethereal in 3, so, that's the other side of the
Oh
build
yeah,
order. If you're sitting
yeah.
there, like, oh, well, on at Alt 3, I can make 80% of enemy attacks miss, and I have an elite troop that can take advantage of that, then maybe you actually do want to have your
Yeah.
build order be mage heavy, and maybe your expansion will suck a little bit of shit, and you'll just as soon as you get those mages at alt 3, then you just kind of explode outward. Um,
Well, yeah, but it's part of the whole nuance of the conversation. Like, you need to have a purpose with like what you're planning to do. I think so we talked all about this before we started recording today, but having a purpose with what you're doing is it's imperative, and sometimes not having a purpose and mindlessly researching could like tie into your lobby because if you're active on the map and you're doing this stuff, but everyone around you is greeting, you might kill that one greed player, right? But you're not going to kill all of them. So the
right.
person who gets to greed out on a turd is always going to have the greatest advantage. However, the nuance of the greed conversation is if you greed and you don't have a defense, you just die, right?
This is going to be next segment is going to be we're talking about when to greed.
I'm a greed guy.
Okay,
I
Oh,
got
let's
this.
hear it.
I got this. So greed, right? Greed. Let's think about greedy entities. Dragons,
right.
okay?
Okay, I'm with you.
Goblins,
Sure.
golem.
No.
Being greedy, golem's greedy. He wants that shit. He wants that ring. When
Go.
you're greeding, you're like golem after that ring,
Oh,
except
Oh,
instead of that
golem.
ring,
A
yeah,
golem is
golem.
a big fucking clay
No,
thing made
not
by a
a
rabbi.
golem. Golem. Anyway, let me finish. What you got to do here is simple, right? When you're thinking about what you're greeting, like if you're greeting, you gotta think about, okay, what are you greeting to? What are you missing out on? And what are the challenges you're going to face in your efforts to outscale your opponents? And what I mean by this, we go step by step. What you're going to, right? There is no point to greed for greed's sake, because at some point in the game, the people that are expanding will always overtake you, right? In half the time. So if someone kills someone else, then suddenly their production is 2 times as much as yours. Now, with certain greed-based strategies, you can attempt to reduce this, right? And if they take casualties, it'll generally be a little bit less than that. But like greeding for greed's sake is generally a mistake, and you'll see that in a lot of games where a player, I'm not going to say any names, will play Joman and greed and greed and greed,
Okay, that's
but
That's
but
right.
at the end,
there's
right?
no need to disrespect the dead, Darkwolf.
I think like
But
there's
at the end, right? At the end, they didn't greed to anything. They passed their timing. When instead there's a differentiation where you're playing very passive, you're focusing on scaling, not because like you're necessarily worried, but because there's a specific objective you want to focus on getting to as quickly as possible to then be more active within the game state.
Yeah, I mean, so the most common grade examples we can put down is you either grade towards construction 7 in this game for lanterns, and then you have a grade research lead, and then you are trying to leverage your research to over
Don't
beat your opponents.
don't the glamour people get their glamour booster at research?
It's not
5?
efficient. Like
Is it?
it,
Is
it
it not? I thought the glamour booster was the new hotness, and lanterns were old and scuffed because you had to go to
no,
7.
I think because like okay, we're gonna tie this back to the stars. It's like when he had his big advantage, and
Right.
Naba is one of these. Naba is like an S tier nation where it has great early game and it has great scaling. So even if it's played passively, it is still going to be like a menace on the map if the player exploits it correctly through research.
Basically,
So
he did what? He killed one person, and then he sat around making labs and hermit sehirs until he had a truly absurd research number, and then got to 9s and won the
yeah, but it
game.
wasn't the glamour. Like the glamour was like 10% of his research. So
Right.
it like and lantern would give you far more than 10, right? And that because it's like plus 10 and lanterns are what fucking.
No, lanterns are plus 12 or something, I think.
Let's
Unless they
double
changed
check.
them.
All right, lanterns are plus 12. The glamour item
This
is.
is your Dominion 6 Rise of the Podcaster washed up crew. We do not know how much research a lightless lantern has.
Yeah, but
Totally,
that is
Oh,
totally.
so the Dreamstone is 9, and it
Uh,
only can be used by a glamour mage, and it is at 5.
right.
So you could say like you could get similar levels. I
But
think
now
it's
it is also that now the case that being glamour fire is now an advantage in the way that the old lantern nations used
oh
to have
yeah,
an
like the
advantage.
combo. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and then so this I guess is a good segue, right? Because there is a irrevocable issue with the construction rush, which is what are your opponents doing while you're going for it? So a lot of the times, right, when you're playing the game and you're deciding whether to greed, a big part of it shouldn't just be what nation you're playing, but it should also be what nations your neighbors are playing and what's going on around you.
I mean, this is where I disagree. I think with like people in the lobby, and we're gonna start getting the Diplo here. If everyone around you is greeting, and like there might be minor wars happening, but you are the sole aggressor, then you are gonna be at a disadvantage versus
I
the people who are greeting like this.
I don't necessarily agree with that. Actually, it only matters. That's only the case if you're actually being like coalitioned, which is often the case in those scenarios. If everyone's passive and you're active, you might get attacked by multiple people. But in my experience, like if literally everyone's in passive and you're active, you're at a disadvantage against the people you don't border. But against the people you border, you can overtake them pretty quickly. Um,
I think
Yeah, though I think it depends on the people because sometimes if you're the sole active player and you attack someone and these 4 people realize you're the sole active player and they're all greeting and can tell
yeah,
each other are greeting,
they'll coalition you.
they'll jump you and they won't even kill you, right? That's the worst game state you can be in.
Yeah. Oh,
You're not
that's
dying,
my
but
default
you're
game
not
state
making any
actually.
progress. Yeah, see, this is what we mean. So like you're exactly what
Yeah, but
Storm was talking about. Like you ain't dying. You're just not making any progress as
well,
your opponent's greed, 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 greed.
I was deliberately excluding the diplomatic aspect of it, because it's like,
Oh yeah.
if that's a little separate. It's like if you're the sole active player and you get jumped because of it, that's a different scenario than just gameplay wise. If you're the sole active player and with a bunch of greeters, but you don't get jumped for it, then you obviously take a lot of advantage.
Well, I mean, that goes into the conversation about build order. If people don't have any builds in mind and they're not trying to or recognize what's around them. So I was trying to tie this into actually nations that you want to attack early because they generally are aiming to greed by default if they're played optimally. So you always want to be watching them. So if like Scalaria is in your game or Nazca, this is a big one we criticized and Lucid made his 27 video where he didn't even respond to anything we said. So it's like if you recognize that someone is in this who are playing these nations and they're by default going to be 1 week early, and then you neighbor them, it's probably a great idea to war them. You don't want Micklin or Nazca to get to these free spawn numbers or when they start pumping out Othelatos. You want to fight them when they're weak and they don't have magic because they have a worse early game than you, but they have a much better late game. So it makes a lot more sense to attack them sooner than later.
I don't necessarily agree with that logic. I'm a scout first kind of guy, so I'm like,
well, yeah, but in default, like yes, you need to scout and you need to see what people's builds are. But
I hear
in general,
I hear your logic a lot. I hear like I need to take out this nation or that nation because they're, say, a blood nation or whatever early. But I hear that logic a lot. But a lot of times, if you scout, if you actually try to look at what people are doing, it's often the case that people are just wrong about the game state. They just flatly don't know what's going on.
Well, you need to evaluate, like,
right.
So before you attack anyone, you should scout. You should know at the very minimum, the basic information is what is this guy's bless? What does he have? You don't want to doom stack all your stuff, walk into a Titan, lose all your shit, and now this guy just freely scales because he went, haha, I took a Titan and I killed all your stuff. Titans are great, and it's like, well, no, you didn't put you didn't respect your opponent enough because you thought you could doom stack, blindly walk on.
Just fucking.
Y'all remember
it's scoutless
you would have died at turn 100?
It's scoutless behavior at the end of it, right?
What did you say, Darkwolf?
Y'all remember when Titans were cool because you wouldn't die at turn 100?
I mean, just get good, beat the enemy force before turn 100. Fucking get in an 8 caster so you'll recast your buffs. Twilight fucking meta.
Bro.
That's fucking cringe.
And I guess the third one, right? This, I'm trying to pull us back onto this topic because I think it's interesting. Is what timings are you missing out by being greedy? Now, this is interesting, right? And it's a very complex topic. But, like, the best way of putting it is...
It's not even timings, bro. It's different.
Well, no, the timings
continue
was the best
with your
way to relate it in common. Immersion did this progress called power curves. And everyone was like, yo, what nations are stronger in the early game? And that's a very big generalization. However, portions of it are valid, right? It's like a good example is expanding, like playing a sacred Cav nation, right? With a good bless, and your nations around you are a bunch of nations weak to that early. But because you're so intent on scaling, you choose to scale rather than to play aggressively and take advantage of your nation's positives in the early game. Like another part of it is not just seeing what your opponents are doing, but understanding the matchups and like what your nation can do effectively at certain research numbers compared to your neighbors. Because there are times where someone will be in a very advantaged position, right? They're playing Shinuyama and the only built Guardians, or another form of position where like the nation or they just hit their Conj 5 timing, right? For like fire elementals, and their opponent, the Pan, has been doing bark skin, right? He's been doing wooden warriors, and it's a perfect combo. And instead, they focus on like scaling breeding further, and that period of time where they had such a marked advantage was left behind.
Well, the problem is mostly people when they play Dominions. One, they're kind of shaky to declare war on their neighbors, and this might be because of the NAP meta. So people are less likely to war their neighbors regardless of what's happening on the strategic map, or they have scoutless behavior and they don't know what's going on. So there could be a variety of things. There could be a variety of stuff, but like using when you hit a research goal and it is a major spell, you should utilize that through gaining land. You shouldn't just, oh, I hit con 5, time to go get, enchantment 5. That doesn't
Ult
use the
7.
timing. You use the timing of the key spell to your advantage based on your nation. Don't just sit there and keep on researching unless like you are a scaling nation and you're not being punished for grading research, and you can keep on pushing your advantage. And in certain cases like Nabaa, where you're such a good nation where you can do this and you can keep on, if people aren't going to punish you, the correct play isn't necessarily to attack your neighbors, it's just to push your advantage because you're infinitely scaling out of the game. Like you are breaking the game by scaling, and
You
you're
traumatized
you're
by Izatara's game. So
no, it's just he played it correctly, and I
he
think
did play it correctly. It's kind of annoying
he absolutely.
that it was that easy, but
But it's no different than Scalaria. They get 12 forts up, and they now have their skeleton production,
okay,
and it's like
it's a
good luck.
little like listen, I think you had a lot more of a chance of disrupting what he was doing than you had with the Dom 5 Scalaria, for example. That was if a Dom
It's
5
the same
Scalaria was
concept.
in his position, it would also end up pretty dominant. It would have to attack more people, but
Well, the point is it's much harder to dissuade someone who is weak early when you let them scale versus the
well,
sooner you attack,
so,
the better.
no.
It's like when you're playing an RTS, and if you let the player fast
So
expand and you don't fast expand, they're
right.
going to outscale you. But
So
if you rush a fast expander, you win. So
so I wanna actually get something in about greed before we move on to the other topic. To me, the win to greed question is
You know what's greedy? You know what's greedy?
you
let him get his point in, Dark Wolf. Hold on.
what?
Okay. Let him talk. Let him
Okay.
talk. No, you can go.
So what I want to point I want to make about greed is that this is what a lot of players I think get wrong. You look around the map and you when you're greeding or wondering if you should greed and be like, okay, am I the best late game? Do I if everyone greeds, if everyone's passive and sits there and greeds, or if everything continues as it's going indefinitely, like maybe someone's attacking multiple people to get more land or whatever, if that continues indefinitely and I greed, then do I win the game? Because if you are certain nations or certain builds, or you have, say, an early advantage, or you won a first war easy, then you can say, yeah, I am in the top. If I just sit here and greed until a late game spell or a global or something, then I win. Or I have I found Mount Chaining early, and I'm a big blood power, so if I greed up, I'm gonna win. And so if that's the case, then yeah, that's correct to greed. However, if you are and this is I want to draw a line. This is different from a temporary consolidation or a pause to hit a research timing. But if you are in any nation that is not going to be the top, if you see any nation in your game that is going to have a better late game, if they greed from the current position than you, then you probably need to have another game plan besides greeting. You can go up to a certain point, but then at that point you should stop and you'll actually have to attack some people to try to win the game proactively. Because typically there is one or maybe two competitors that are capable of winning one war, then greeting, and then winning the game. And other people, if they try to do the same thing while that guy's doing it, they'll just do a worse job, and they'll end up being fighting in the late game with a disadvantage against the guy who got there first with more. And so that's
Yeah,
just that's just an encouragement, and we'll put a pin in this playstyles thing because we'll come back to it either this episode or the next. But that's just a little bit of encouragement to play actively if you are not if you're not going for a specific timing and you're not like the player that wins if they agree.
You know, a good thing I saw was in strategy games where your units have upkeep. If you build units and they're not doing anything, you are spending gold for nothing.
That is correct.
You should have them. You should have them doing stuff.
And in
I mean,
It was,
the
it
big
was a
part.
simplification, but like,
Yeah,
well,
I
what did you want to say, Soren?
I'm trying to say, like, I think a big problem is people they don't evaluate the true strength of nations. Like, people will get into these like fair. They're like, oh, I'm playing Ameagarth, I'm gonna shit out statues, and that's super strong. And they might be right, but if they don't actually, statues are good, but like when you start evaluating the power of like, oh, I think that this is going to be better than, Legions of Demise getting online or Infinite Skeletons. It's like, well, it's not. Like, it's not the same power level. You might have, like, a B tier strength where it's really good, but it's not as good as that shit. Like, that shit will
Right.
actually,
It's like
like fuck your, like,
Hall
your
of
nation's not that good.
Hall of Statues is very good in the late game when you have other late game spells and when you have you essentially have some of the best like late game troops in the game. You end up with giants with a whole bunch of inbuilt advantages, basically. I think they're also like some of them are sacred or whatever.
They are sacred. All
Yeah,
the
they're
statues are
sacred,
sacred.
so it's insane.
Even more good.
But so that's
But they're
insane.
not as good as
Insane
the
scaling.
actual broken shit.
Right?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
act.
they're not as good as if you fucking if you just had if your research exploded quadratically and you're in the Agartha players in Hall of Statues, but you're in like 5 different 9s at that point, and they just will fucking lose to you. Or if you're in every path, or you've got all the late game
Well,
summons that you need.
another problem is a lot of these players who get to these points, they only start moving once they get these spells. They don't preemptively move, and then right when they hit the spell, they're
Be
attacking.
in
They they,
position.
they have
Yeah,
like this. It's like it's a rolling snowball instead of, but they're starting their snowball as they get it instead of they should do it as they're
yeah.
about to get it
Instead of saying, "Well, I'm 3 turns off this timing, so I'm going to attack a
in
player
three
with
turns.
no." Well, they say I'm 3 turns off this timing, so I'm going to start moving in 3 turns. When they should be saying I'm 3 turns off this timing, so I'm going to attack with raiders into this player now, and have follow up armies on the way. So that when I get that timing, it will be time for the first army on army big fights.
Yeah,
Um,
like the timing is so important, and people they waste so much time and then they get to these late game scenarios, and it's kind of why like me and you are sometimes puzzled when we look at people's situations, like why does it turn 40 to 50 or 60 and like you haven't moved anything. You like if someone backs up their turns, and you'd be blown away by the amount of people just like sitting around and not using their advantage. Like you
this is
like it's so crazy. Like so I step into a game and this guy is it's turned 40 or 50. This guy has this like in the game,
You
and
know
he
why?
had the
Oh,
ability to do this stuff for 40 turns. Like nothing changed. He just never took
well.
advantage
I
of it.
just want to drop this sneaky one in here before Dark Wolf gets his point in, but I really do think that the average Dominion skill level has cratered from 5 to 6. I think the only person I've seen so far that is as good in 6, and this includes myself, that as they were in 5 is probably Zan. And everyone else that I've seen or played with has probably lost skill going from
Haven't
5
played
to
with me
6.
because I haven't played it all.
Yeah, yes, you've definitely lost skill, and then
yeah, bro.
I don't
This
know
guy
about
plays
that.
backwards.
it's possible that Krun hasn't lost skill because like he's kind of just been active the entire time, but I haven't played with him, so I don't know if he's lost skill. But everyone else I've played with, like advanced players, non-advanced players, no matter how much I respect their skill or disrespect their skill, like I think the general level has just gone down significantly. And I know I'm like making
Bro, I'm
plays
way
that I
worse.
think that are like gonna be good, and then they're just like mediocre. So it's like I've definitely lost skill myself. Um,
I mean, it's just like yeah. If people don't aren't even thinking about like the Dominions is like a really cool design game, but also it's like because of its lack of tutorial and lack of information that's like kind of kept and updated by the community, it you have these points where like the
Bro,
information just goes in circles.
Dominions has like 2,000 players and none of them know what they're doing. Like, we don't have, it's not a big enough community to provide an actual informational ecosystem.
Well, no, certain players definitely elevate the scene, and if you learn from them, you can improve your game. But because the information isn't as standard. And
Homie,
this
they
is
all stop playing.
yeah. I mean,
Anyway,
if the really good players all stop, and then you're new
Right.
to the game and you have no idea where to start, you look at the spell tree and you're like, "What the fuck is this?" You know.
Yeah. Um.
I,
what I was gonna, oh God, what was I gonna say? Damn it. Oh, so one thing is you see people treating research like it's linearly, right? Which is a mistake. Research is more like a hump graph, right? At a certain point, the effectiveness gained by your research advantage caps out before it automatically begins shrinking, right? The
Mhm.
second thing is people assume, like people at the beginning of the game will see their research advantage and they'll shoot way up in research when they get lanterns. And so they'll assume that because of that, their research has stayed consistently ahead of their opponent, or the gap is growing. When instead, because their opponent took a bunch of land, is now building mages, and finally got their own research boosters, the resources they have to pump into these things allow them to catch up much quicker than the former expects.
Yeah.
The third thing, which is what I was going to say earlier, is you want to
Uh-huh.
know what's greedy?
What's greedy?
Kanye West put out a Vulture
oh,
2 album, and it's not even done. Bro, he's releasing updates
Wait,
I
wait,
to
wait,
his
wait, wait,
album.
wait.
hate
Is he charging for them? Is he
No, no, but like, think about it, right?
he's
On Spotify, right?
well, I
People will
want to
like listen to an album once and not like it and be done.
it.
But
Yes.
instead,
uh,
he's changing it constantly so people keep re-listening to it. We've been conned.
so
It's
this
got one finished song.
well, his name is literally Kanye, so like that's kind of to be
I
expected.
hate this
That
pop
was
culture.
I'm
Like
disconnecting you.
the point. So you're saying
No
that we're going into an era of early access albums the way that
music.
games have gone, and you think it's like going to
Oh,
be kind of like a grift, how some early access games are like, here, pay for my unfinished shit so I can complete it, and then it gets complete and it's disappointing. You're saying like that's the sort of album meta that Kanye is bringing us into.
Yes, that's actually 100% what I'm saying. In fact,
listen, Nurkwolf,
the
don't
next thing
you
you're going to
dare
see
bring this up again.
the next thing you're going to see is artists
This
in 5 years
Oh my
are going
god,
to
just cut
release
the
DLC
recording.
for the albums.
Yeah,
They're
they're
going to
gonna
release
you're gonna
DLC for the
release like,
albums,
oh yeah, this is this
which
album.
gives you 2 new songs and like a 3 minute extension on their most popular song.
Right, and then once they have two or three DLCs, then they'll
Oh,
release a complete edition. The way the games do
Yeah,
it, an album that has a complete edition, so that they
it's
can
literally
re-release
just
the
like
album.
you know how currently if artists have a really successful album,
Yeah,
they'll release like an extended version of that album for free.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're just going to do that, except they're going to charge.
So that was the episode on build order for Dominion 6: Rise of the Podcaster, your premier podcast for all things Dominions, foreign elections, and rap beefs. Base things. Next episode, we will be returning and we will be discussing a little bit on forts as they relate to build order, and a little bit more on defending yourself against diplodoggery.